Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to call this evening's regular meeting of the Stoughton Area School District Board of Education to order. Becky, could you take the roll, please?
Yes. Mr. Bouban?
Here.
Mr. Coughlin will be coming later. Mr. Fry?
Here.
Ms. Fitzgibbon is excused. Mr. Jackson?
Here.
Ms. Robb is excused. Ms. Sorg?
Here.
Ms. Tarpinian?
Here.
President Jerks?
Here. And I would entertain a motion with respect to the agenda.
I would like to make a motion that we suspend the rules and flip our spotlight on learning with public comment so that we can be respectful of the time of our Dane County executive.
All right, there's a motion to essentially change the agenda around. Is there a second?
Just so I'm clear about the motion, we'll still have public comment?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
It's just flip-flopping those two.
Just making sure. Okay. Second?
I'd second that. Okay. Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, then we will make that very brief change. And then with that, I would ask Dr. Onsager to introduce our guest.
It's my pleasure to introduce Joe Parisi, the Dane County Executive. We are so thrilled to be partnering with Dane County on our Building Bridges program, which was an initiative that Joe brought and rolled out. Was it 2 years ago? It was a few years. And so it was one of his initiatives, and we're so thankful for that and are so excited to be a partner to meet some of the mental health needs of our students. So I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. Well, I appreciate you giving me a couple minutes. I try not to take up too much of your time tonight, but I just wanted to stop by for the same reason, to thank you for partnering on Building Bridges and to make sure that feel free, the channel of communication is open if you have any questions. We're really excited. As was mentioned, just briefly, Building Bridges grew out of a meeting I had with some folks in Verona a few years ago, just reaching out to say, how can, what are your challenges? Can the county partner to help schools? Because you guys can't be expected to do it all, right? And you have, challenges that you're all very much aware of. And really the number one challenge that was brought to my attention was the increase in mental health challenges within the schools, and asking if there was anything we could do about it. So we piloted Building Bridges in a couple of school districts, in Verona, some Prairie, and one in Madison. And as you probably know, they're two-person school-based mental health teams, and they will be there not only to help during an immediate need, say there's a mental health crisis and school staff might need assistance with helping de-escalate a problem as an alternative to having to turn to law enforcement. Someone can come and help the school staff, help de-escalate, but as importantly, the goal of the teams is to be there for the young people and their families. They'll do outreach to the families and connect them to services so that they can get the assistance they need. And not only when there's a crisis moment, but ideally, they'll become part of the fabric of the school, and the teachers and the staff will get to know them, and they'll be able to help people maybe recognize signs of anxiety or depression, or this young person's having a challenge. And again, they can reach out to the families, connect them to resources that can help them before those challenges become bigger. So, we've expanded now. I believe this is going to be our 11th or 12th team across the county. And so we've just had rave reviews from teachers and staff, and we're really excited. As you probably know, Catholic Charities is the provider, and you guys partner with us. It's a 50-50 cost share, and so I know that resources are tight, and I'm just delighted that you were able to find the dollars to invest in this. And so please feel free to be in touch if there are any challenges or questions or anything you want to know about this. But again, I just wanted to stop by and thank you for your partnership. I think you'll see great results from it.
Thank you. Does anybody have questions for Mr. Parisi? Comments?
I have a question. When you say that they're sort of part of the fabric of the school, how much time are they usually in the schools, or is it more a phone resource?
Well,
or how-
they'll be full-time here.
They're
The
full-time.
two-person team, yeah.
Okay.
And so they'll be, within the schools and then, doing outreach to families and making those connections. So they will be a full-time resource for the district.
Wonderful.
And they have been hired with, Kelly Melcher sat on the interview team with Catholic Charities
Okay.
to hire the two individuals. And they will have an office here in this building, but they will be doing outreaches to the schools and working in close conjunction with our students and our families. But yeah, they will be in the district full-time.
Wonderful, thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Joe?
Is this something, Tim, that we'll have to approve on a regular basis, or is it a rolling
It's
situation?
rolling. So it's something that, we can assess it at the end of the year, whether we want to stay with it. But everything I've heard from every participating district is the benefits greatly outweigh the cost on this, and the benefits that we can give to our students and the benefits that we can give to our families. Because as Joe said, we are partnering, and so it's a cost-sharing measure. And so we can assess it and we will look at it, and there's data that they provide us, and there's constant conversations. But from the preliminary research that we've done from, Verona, DeForest is involved in this, Sun Prairie and a few other districts that we've called around Dane County, they are hard pressed to get rid of it because of the benefits and the effect that it's making.
Yeah, we did some initial surveys too amongst staff people in the schools where we were piloting this, and it was just, I've never seen that much support, to be honest with you, for a program. So hopefully you'll have the same experience, and ultimately your kids will benefit from this.
But the county is prepared to stay with this as well?
Yes, we are committed to this.
Yeah.
We think this is very important. This is not a mandated service, but we believe it's a service that's vital for all of the communities in the county.
Great.
So, quick question. Does it require additional training of educators, staff? And also, just trying to understand, so the training aspect, but also, gosh, that just escaped my mind. So maybe you could hit on the training. I'll remember the other
It's a
one.
referral process. So
Okay.
they are working directly with the students. So it's not an additional training that our staff need. It's a referral, working with our staff and working with our social workers and our school psychs and our learning strategists and our classroom teachers of recommending students to this program. And then they work with the students.
Okay.
Yeah, so it should be, hopefully it's a resource, an
Okay,
additional
just
resource
a
for the staff,
resource.
someone to
Right.
turn to say, hey, Johnny's having some challenges, can you help us?
Okay.
Can you reach out? And so hopefully it'll help everyone.
Anybody else? Well, thank you.
Thank you.
You're right, this is a big need, not just in our district, but across the county. And we really appreciate the interest and the help that we're getting from the county on
Yeah,
this.
absolutely, it's an honor. Scott reminded me to tell you how impressed I was with the Fab Lab. We didn't want to take too much time, but we came and toured that
Thank you.
a couple months ago too, and you're just doing a lot of great stuff around here, so.
Okay,
Appreciate it.
thank you.
Thank
All
you.
right, thank you, have a nice
Thank
evening.
you.
All right, next up on the agenda then is public comment. I don't know if we had people sign up to speak. I thought I saw a couple folks. We'd ask you, if you do want to address the board, to come up to the podium. Please state your name and give us your address. And try to keep your comments to 3 minutes, please. And I'll just call you in order. Thank you. Sandra Whitney.
Sandra Whitney, address is 1764 US Highway 12 and 18. I'm probably one of your further out residents in the district. And my child is new to your district, he's a junior. We did open enroll to Deerfield, which was closer to us, but when Deerfield went to a one-to-one technology, my son made the decision to come to the home school, which is Stoughton. And so now I was surprised to find that Stoughton's going to one-to-one technology. In his opinion, his feeling was, Mom, I didn't sign up for K-12 Virtual Academy. So that's one issue. I have concerns with an online curriculum. The larger issue is where we live, we're in an internet connectivity black hole. We do not have internet access. So with the requirement for him to do homework online at home, homework, he can't do it. And that is one reason why he came back to the home school. When I talked to administrators a year ago, I had no indication that this was going to come down the pipe. Had we known, perhaps we would have gone to Monona Grove or McFarland. There was no survey sent to us, no input from residents. It was just a letter I got an email, hey, your kid's going to get a Chromebook. And I went, oh boy, here we go again. So I work with our legislators, and I find Gary Hebel actually used our example in one of his newsletters, and I don't know if I can submit this to the board.
Sure.
And I know I put a check mark there, and then I also photocopied a plat map that shows kind of the area in Dane County where we live. And this is not only us, it's our neighbors and our businesses in the area. So it's not only a school-related thing, this is, as you know, a state issue as well, and there's money to be had and fought over and whatnot. But my main concern is, how can the district help my kid at home to get that homework done? Where our only internet connection right now is cell data, and that's really expensive. And I'm not in a position to like up our data plan to support online curriculum for him to get his homework done. So I guess those are my comments and concerns. And I apologize, perhaps I should have, I see that, you know, to find a resolution with a teacher, principal, and or district administrator, but I thought this is kind of a bigger scenario as well. So I don't know if you have hotspots that kids can check out and take home, or if you will also have hotspots on buses when kids are going to and fro in sports related items when they're away from school, and long bus rides. You know, that's a really good opportunity for them to do their homework. My kids have always been 3 athlete students, so they're away from home a lot. And they've always done their homework when they're sitting at their cross-country meets or whatever. But, you know, it's a whole framework that needs to be thought out of how are the kids going to have internet access.
Okay.
So, and here's a map, too, if you want
Okay.
that. I appreciate your time, and thanks for all your work that you do on the board.
Thank you. Sandra Loftus wanted to address us.
Sandra Loftus, 2217 West Milwaukee Street. So recently in the news, there's a story of a pilot who, 10 minutes into his flight, 127 passengers on the plane, 10 minutes in, right, comes across an undetected hailstorm, totally wipes out the front of the airplane, renders him, it takes out the autopilot, destroys the windshield, leaves he and his co-pilot flying blind. He was able, because of his experience and expertise, he was able to turn that plane around and land it safely, not one life lost or any injuries. He had acquired skills and knowledge of over 30 years as a pilot. Most certainly, he spent time over those years taking courses, learning new technology, but most importantly, he gained that experience and the ability to land that plane blindly by being in the cockpit, actually flying a plane. He learned from other experienced pilots that stuck around, were able to guide him and teach him and pass things on to him and mentor him. When I read this story, I started thinking about what's going on in our district. I'm here tonight to advocate for my children. I'm here to advocate for the educators of our district. Ever since the current compensation plan has been implemented, our district has seen turnover of staff at an alarming rate. I understand every district has turnover, but I feel that's become our standard pat answer. Well, every district has turnover. It's not working for me. It's not good enough for me as a taxpayer, as someone that has 2 children in this district. We're losing experienced teachers at an alarming rate. It's extremely concerning to both my husband and I. Before we moved back to Stoughton 5 years ago, we were living in another district. I chose to send my kids to this district. It had zero to do with convenience. Convenient would have been putting them on the bus, which would have picked up right in front of my house. I chose to school choice them here because I felt it was the best education they were going to get, especially compared to where we were living. Hasn't been an easy choice, but we've started looking at other options for our kids as they get ready for the high school. I'm concerned that some of the teachers that I see sitting here aren't going to be there by the time my kids get there in another year. You can't provide the rigor and the quality if you do not have consistency. And one of the ways you get that consistency is by taking care of your educators and treating them fairly and like professionals. That people stay. They want to come back. They want to be here. I want my kids to have those teachers who are spending their time in the classroom, not on busy work that has unclear expectations and that takes them away from preparing meaningful day-to-day plans. When I'm at conferences and workshops or just talking with people, and you get, as a professional, and they ask, like, what's going on in Stoughton? What's up with that compensation plan? I've had people talk to me about being on their own district's compensation committees, and they said, yeah, we've looked at your plan. We laughed at it and then put it aside. We're referred to by other districts as their teacher training grounds or their supply chain for new teachers. We've known since this plan was implemented that there were problems with it, yet we implemented it anyways. There have been promises to work cooperatively together to fix those problems. 83% of our staff deem it to have fundamental flaws. When I was growing up, there were times when executive decisions were made by the administration of my house, also known as my parents. Then there were times when decisions were made after our whole family sat around cooperatively at the kitchen table, and we were all allowed to give our opinions. My two brothers and I were all treated equally and respectfully, and were made to feel as though our opinion mattered and would be taken into account. Sometimes there was give and take on all parts in my family. The one thing, though, that my dad always taught us was to never apologize for speaking your truth. It feels as though staff spoke their truth, administration doesn't like it, so now they want to take their ball and go home. As a taxpayer with 2 children in this district, it angers me that we're not only disregarding and devaluing how our staff are feeling, we're also willing to throw away the money that we've spent with the Woods Group because we didn't get the data that you wanted. We all know times are tight on budgets all over our state, and we need to be fiscally responsible. We need administration and staff to work together cooperatively and to come up with a better compensation plan for the educators of our district. We need to look to the districts that are retaining their staff and not experiencing the turnover that we are. We should be looking at what it is they're doing, how they're treating their staff that makes people want to stay when they could go elsewhere and make more money. That is what we should be trying to emulate. A town is only as strong as their schools. If we want our community to strengthen and grow, we need to take care of our educators, the professionals taking care of our children. We need to treat them fairly and as professionals. The children of our district deserve the pilots who are able to fly blind and safely land that plane, passing along their knowledge and expertise to the next generation of pilots. It's where I got most of my experience. It was a lot of those mentors that were there for a long time. I'm hopeful that you decide to make the right choice and that you don't bypass the compensation committee and that cooperative working together. To the educators of our district, I want to say to you, thank you for all that you do, and never apologize for speaking your truth. Thank you.
Thank you. John Wedge is next on the list.
Good evening. My name is John Wedge. I'm Executive Director with Wisconsin Education Association Council, Region 6. A number of you know me. Recently met Scott and Joe, Donna, I've known obviously for, a long time, Steve. I'm here really on behalf of the Stoughton EA and the teachers in the district. I don't know where to begin on the compensation issue that you've got in front of you. I will tell you that I work with a number of other districts in this south and southwestern part of the state, but particularly here in Dane County. The watchwords for policy in those districts are recruitment and retention. The watchwords are stability. They are teamwork and collaboration. And my experience in the brief time I've been working with the district, with the superintendent, the human resources director, and some of you board members, are that you seem to understand that's required, but you're not living by those ideas. Nowhere is this being more in evidence in the reaction that I've heard and seen from educators to the proposal that I understand you're going to be discussing this evening. For some inexplicable reason, reach beyond the compensation committee that was put together to do collaborative work, informed by an external party who could bring you analysis and perspective, and instead impose that compensation system that has been universally derided outside of this school district and repudiated by educators as capricious, arbitrary and subjective, that pits one educator against another. I do not know why the board would think that that was a good idea. So I'm here on behalf of, I think, the SEA, because they've asked me to come, but also for you to think about the community members. I know many people who live in your community who don't understand why you're doing this, and they don't understand why the problems that the district have had with recruitment and retention of quality educators are bound to continue. I look forward to the discussion, and I look forward to you putting the situation to rights. Thank you.
Thank you. Jonathan Doherty, please.
Good evening, I'm Jonathan Doherty on behalf of the SEA, but I also teach Spanish at Stoughton High School and advise the GSA and anti-racism team. I can't say anything nearly as eloquently as the previous two speakers did, so I just want to reiterate what they said and hope that you as a board choose to improve trust with the SEA and with all teachers in the district by honoring the process that was decided upon by all of us and not usurping a committee whose sole intention is to discuss the compensation committee. It's my understanding that the upcoming compensation committee's agenda is a rather large one that seems to be a productive planned meeting. So tonight's possible vote, 2 weeks from now, seems like it would render that meeting moot and dissolve the trust that we do currently have. So please include teachers. Please stick to the plan that we've decided on. I know that's not incredibly clear, but on an unrelated note, I wanted to thank the district and the board for continuing to have such a positively aggressive anti-harassment policy, considering recent events across the United States. So that's something that the GSA and anti-racism team continues to promote, especially at the beginning of school year. So let's keep that policy in place. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that wanted to address the board tonight? All right, seeing nobody moving forward, then we'll move on to the legislative update.
Well, there's not much to update because we are still one of 2 states that do not have a budget, and it doesn't look like they're going to discuss anything with the budget until the Foxconn stuff happens. I have a lot of access to lots of different things, and everything was always Foxconn, and I wanted to almost do a Wordle because all of the other words would be little, and then it would just be Foxconn. So it's really taking up all of the energy. I put together a little report for you with links to all of the various items that you'd want to look at. Do what you like. There's a lot of legislation that's coming, or forth in a public hearing this Thursday. Most of them don't really have a huge impact on us, but I mean, I left you links there so you could read on those as well. And then you'll note next to those that one of the legislators that represents someone in the Stoughton Area School District, our 114 square miles, I put down if they were a co-sponsor of the bill, just so that you had that you knew that in case you wanted to contact if that person is actually your own legislator. And I just will keep you updated as I hear more.
Thank you. Questions from anyone? Yeah, the whole Foxconn thing definitely has thrown a wrench into the budget process, especially because of the highway bonding that would be part of that, because that's one of the things that the Assembly and the Senate have been fighting about. So I don't suppose you've heard any rumors as to when that's going to get done.
No, but transportation is definitely the crux. So, I mean, nothing's even happening this week, so other than that public hearing. But as I hear more, I mean, if something comes up, I mean, I've gotten lots of emails that we should really contact legislators and again remind them that we want them to stand by the budget that as it was laid out. It's not exactly clear to me what we should, what should I be doing? And at this, I think we've discussed, we do need to have a policy that would give me some latitude as legislative liaison to respond. But all I can do is just, have you all you folks do that on your own time and just not representing the board. But our folks are generally receptive to what we need. And just as I was driving here today, there was a broadcast on NPR where Walker said not to worry. The 200 and 204 is still going to happen, so no school should stop any of their planning because it's going to happen. So we'll see what goes there.
Well, we do have meetings every Monday for the next 3 weeks, so
Sure.
If anything does require board attention, we're meeting every week. So.
Yeah, and I'm sorry for having to send this out late, but it's just things are happening. I keep waiting for something new to happen that I could put in there. Steve's got a question.
Yeah.
I heard something about gun education.
That's in. I put something in here.
All right. I didn't see.
WASB testified on about the gun safety curriculum bill, and they do. They remain neutral. The bill is not going to set a mandate. It's going to be just that you could do it if you wanted, but you can, WSB testified for informational purposes, and so you can go on their website and view their testimony. It seems that would not be something we would choose to do, given the fact that we passed a resolution against gun possession. But there is, there are districts in the state that actually offer the hunter safety course at their district. So, I think that's why WSB had to try to remain neutral, because in some communities, the school is the only place where people can gather. So, it might be, if something more happens with it, we may have to take stronger action. But it's definitely mixed from what I understand, what people are supporting and not supporting as far as that goes.
Well, I agree with you that since we passed something related to guns, we probably should continue along those lines.
Other questions? Okay, thank you. District Administrator report.
Thanks, Scott. I have several different things, and I apologize because they bounce all over the place. First thing is, board members, you have at your spot, this is a pass that gets you into any Badger Conference sporting event, home or away, for this year. So enjoy, it's part of what the conference does, and it gives the pass to every board members. Which lets me segue into services or things that we currently offer to our staff and things that I'm hoping to announce within the next 2 weeks and finalize. So currently we allow staff to get into home sporting events by showing their ID. They can get in free for there. We also allow them to use our pool during the swim hours for free. We've been working really hard, and I've contacted a bunch of different places, and I'm hoping to announce the details first day of staff back on August 29th. But we are going to ink deals and enter into partnerships with several different entities. One partnership will allow staff members to going online, schedule and pay for an oil change, and the company will come to the office, the school office, pick up their car, take it back, change their oil, and bring it back to school, and bring the keys back to school. We're also looking to, and we've got the proposal, and we just need to finalize the details, to same thing, staff can contract online and pay online with a dry cleaning service that will come to the school office, pick up dry cleaning on Wednesday, return it on Friday. If they pick it up on Friday, they'll return it on Wednesday. They will also offer some tailoring and seamstress things if staff need that as well with some of the things. We're looking at working with one of the entities to possibly offer staff the ability to call in a grocery order and have it waiting for them after school to pick it up. We also are going to enter into a partnership with a local health club that will provide a free membership for every one of our staff members to this health club. They can enroll their entire family for $25 a month in addition to their free fee if they want to enroll their family. They will also get discounted services or prices on classes or individual training. So we're excited to be able to offer that service as well to our staff. And then we'll continue to look at what other local businesses in particular that we can partner with to offer some perks and services to our staff. Again, I'm hoping to finalize those and announce all of those on August 29th and the details to staff when they return. But I wanted to give you a heads up of what we've been working on in that realm for things to offer to our staff. Next thing I had was Communications Committee. Communications Committee will meet probably in September. If you have a name or names of any community members you think would be good on the Communications Committee, please shoot me an email because I will reach out to them for when we're doing the invite and working with that. I believe John, Steve, and Joe are the 3 board members on that. So we're looking to expand our community members on the committee. So if any board member has any ideas of, I have a few, but if any board members has any ideas, please let me know. Third thing I had, and I told you I'm jumping around quite a bit. We're going to be talking, and you'll hear me talk more on this, of indicators of success, not only for our students, but for our district. We know that if our students are successful, our district will also be successful as well. But we also know as human beings, our students are more than just a number. They're more than just what I get on the forward exam, what I get on my ACT, what I get on a standardized test. So we're looking at 3 different things to indicate, to monitor, and we're looking at the metrics for each of those to monitor if students are successful. One is their academic achievement, which should include their standardized tests, which should include their grades, their GPA, etc. Those are important things. Those are not something that we take lightly. Those are not something that we can just say, oh, they don't have any relevance. They tell us a vital piece of information. The second indicator that we're going to look at is college, career, and life readiness skills. Now that's a big mouthful. It's also a big one that we need to define. What does it mean to be college ready? What does it mean to be career ready? What does it mean to be life ready? What are those skills? What are those skills that the businesses are looking at besides academic achievement? And that could be problem solving, that could be working as a team, et cetera. Coming up, I proposed on a future board agenda, I would recommend Judy would lead us in a conversation of what does that mean? What are those attributes? And get some input from you as a board as well of what do you think some of those are as we're looking at metrics, as we're looking to define those. The third indicator of success is engagement. We know that the more students are engaged, the more successful they are. So we'll be looking at metrics to monitor our student engagement, from participation in extracurriculars to attendance. Attendance is a big indicator of engagement, to other metrics. And so we're looking at the metrics to kind of do our dashboard of those three indicators. And how are our students doing? And how are we as a system doing in engaging our students? So we're still in the beginning stages of those. We're still, the standardized test in the academics, we have more metrics that we can use. From the STAR testing, to Fontes and Pinnell, to the Forward exam, to the ACT, to the Aspire, to grades. We have more indicators with those. The rest of them, we're still defining the indicators. But I wanted to give you a heads up and a preview of things to come that you'll be hearing more about in future board meetings. Another thing that you'll be hearing more about in future board meetings, and primarily in February, I believe is when they will be ready to present even more, is if you remember from the April 8th conversation with the community, one of the, on the blue dot exercise, one of the things that the community talked about is pathways. So the high school is working on pathways. They're working on career pathways, and what does it mean for that pathway, and what does the pathway look like, and how do you make the pathway flexible enough so that if I start down one pathway and determine that's not where I want to go, I can easily transition to something else. The most logical pathway to start with is our health careers. We have the most pieces in place, from we have a intro to health careers, to we have a health career curriculum, to we have Scotland and other nursing homes in the hospital who are willing to partner with us on that. But you'll hear more from the high school on high school pathways coming up this year, and what does that look like, and what does that mean, and what options can we give for students to explore. Because one of the best things is if somebody goes down a pathway and says, yes, this is what I want to do. But equally as powerful as somebody goes down a pathway and gets to their senior year and says, no, I don't want to be a vet. Okay? Better to find out now than I'm in college and I determine I don't want to be a vet after 3 or 4 years. So it's different options that we will be working with our students, with our staff, with talking to business as well as far as attributes and things like that for the different pathways. And then the last thing I have, again, jumping around, is central registration is this week Thursday and next week Tuesday. So I have a plethora of things and all different subjects. I wanted to give you a heads up of some things to come that you can look forward to in discussions.
Okay, questions about anything? Don?
I have a question about the communications committee.
Yep.
I've previously served on that committee, and there were several community members that were part of that committee. Will they? We'll have the opportunity. We'll have
an opportunity. We'll send an invite out to them to continue to be part of the committee. But as you know, things transition, and I'd rather have more than enough than not enough on the committee.
So we're not starting over from.
No.
Okay.
Any other questions? Steve?
I think, it's interesting about the staff benefits, given that we're going to have a discussion around compensation plan, but I'm curious to know if you're getting feedback from people saying we want these things, or this is just something that is coming up.
I wasn't getting feedback that this is something they wanted, but it's real hard as an educator to find time for some of these services with the hours you're working. You have the typical hours that the students are there, but you have the extra hours you're putting in. And so sometimes your personal services and things that you need are put on the back burner as an educator. So I was looking for ways, are there ways that we can help supplement our staff? Are there ways that we can help support our staff for what they're doing? From basic services like oil change and dry cleaning and potentially groceries, to how do we help them maintain their own health with an opportunity to work out, with an opportunity to go train at a local health club, to take classes, whether it's Pilates or Zumba or you name it, or a cycling class, etc., or whether maybe they want to work with a personal trainer. So no, I wasn't hearing any direct feedback from it, but I thought they were services that I think our staff would take full advantage of.
Could I just add something
Yeah.
to that? Because as a member of the Employee Relations Committee, we've actually talked about
Right.
this for quite some time. I think it went back a couple years to WASB convention, and some of us sitting in a session about things that like this that would be beneficial, and it just took some time to kind of put them all into place and get to that point. So it's not a new concept.
Yeah, I can say that I know that other districts do have things like this in place, not necessarily the same ones, but the same concept. And one of the nice benefits for our community is that these would all be local businesses. You know, so community partnerships is something that is part of our strategic plan. So that this would be one aspect of that. Yeah, Steve?
Are there any staff on the Employee Relations Committee?
No, that is a
Could that
committee.
be something that we could think about?
At some point, we could, I suppose, but that has always been a committee comprised of board members and administration.
Because of the sensitive nature of some of the issues, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, frequently it involves issues around individual personnel, and the committee would not be able to do its business if they have members of staff on the committee. You'd have to basically kick that person out, or persons, for that discussion.
Other questions?
Oh, I'm sorry, John.
No, you're fine. The indicators of success, I have a couple questions. Is that something that is tying directly into the revisions that, or the updating that we'll be doing to the strategic plan? And is indicators of success like is that a program, or is that just what you're calling these three efforts right now?
It's my term, as far as indicators of success. It somewhat comes out of the strategic plan, but it also comes out of, I think we rely on standardized tests as our only component a lot of times to measure student success. And it's my personal belief that, again, a student is more than a number. How else do we measure what other attributes they have, and how do we prepare them to be successful? So that's what our conversations have been around. That's one component, and that's an important component, but it should be one of, in this case, three that we're talking about. And so it comes out of that work, it comes out of kind of some of the research I've seen, it comes out of discussions I've had with various people in the system, and it's come from my own personal observations with it, that how do we measure if a student is being successful? And right now, what we look at primarily is their grade point average, what they do on the standardized tests, and those type of indicators. And there are some students who their grade point average isn't an adequate reflection of who they are and what they bring to the table.
And so how do you imagine, or how do you expect that you'll be presenting these thoughts to us in terms of how the entire district becomes involved?
It's conversations that individual buildings are having, it's conversations we're having with staff, it's conversations we'll have here. I'm not saying we're ready to launch all these indicators right now. This is the year that we're kind of looking at them. What does that mean? Ideally, eventually, it'll be sort of a dashboard type of thing that we're going to look at these indicators and what does it tell us. So, for example, maybe our students are doing really well, that our students are engaged, that we've defined college, career, and life ready, and we believe they have those skills, but they're not doing well on the standardized tests. What does that tell us? Does that tell us that our curriculum isn't rigorous enough? Does that tell us that maybe our curriculum isn't aligned to what they are testing? And is that okay if we as a district in the community say this is the curriculum we value? That leads to those type of conversations. Maybe there's another area that's out of line with the other. What does that tell us? So I'm looking for something that'll lead to a richer conversation, not only in the district, not only with staff, but also amongst the board, amongst indicators and metrics of the board that the board can have discussions of what does this mean and what does this tell us and where we're going and where do we allocate our resources, and are we allocating our resources to the things that make the difference.
And do you see then this being something that maps directly to or is directly applied somewhere within the strategic plan?
It will have elements woven within the strategic plan.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions? Allison?
Is this, that was also in the legislative update, some of the documents and websites that Donna provided for us, that there was some talk at the state level of changing some of the success indicators. Is this different or?
And somewhat it's aligned because some of the success indicators that they're looking to do are college and career. Okay. We're also looking at life and other things, but that's a conversation. There are numerous, you could go on websites, you could go on different places that all have different indicators. So what do we believe as a district are the prime indicators we're going to be looking at? And so that's one of the conversations is there are a lot of different indicators depending on what site and what group you look at. What do we feel as a district are those indicators? So yeah, it's aligned to that, and some of the work there will dovetail into what we're doing.
So the state level, we don't really know what that is yet.
Correct.
It sounds like it's still very
Correct.
much in discussion. Okay.
Other questions?
Yeah, I know that it seems like every year the legislature wants to tinker with their so-called school report cards.
Right.
I think this is part of that. So yeah, I think it makes sense that rather than rely on Madison telling us how we should measure, we should come up with our own. So I think that makes sense. Other questions? Okay, thank you. Sorry,
Yeah,
Steve.
well, I just wanted to throw out, I mean, from a business perspective, when you look at metrics, from my experience, you know, they need to be definitely measurable, they need to be transparent, and you need to be prepared to respond to the information that you have. So they're just, you know, I'm sure you guys have that in mind, but you know, that might mean fiscally you have to respond to something. So I just want to get that out there. Might have to spend money.
Well, and that has been done in the past. For example, when Dr. Onsager came on board, one measure of our district's performance was the over-identification of non-white students as being special ed students. And that was one of the things that we addressed, and it did require the expenditure of some money. It also required some adjustments in how we teach. And you know, we've done that in the past, we'll continue to do it in the future. Okay, next up is the consent agenda, and Joe has agreed to fill in for our clerk and deputy clerk who are not here.
Okay. I move approval of the July 24, 2017 regular meeting minutes. Move approval of the July 20 through August 24, 2017 check register as presented. We would like to say thank you to the following individuals and groups and move approval of their donations to the district. $500 from the Madison Area Music Association, Ryan Casey, MMA Teacher of the Year for music. $200 from the Kiwanis Club of Stoughton for student school supplies. $25 from Kent and Helen Carberg for the Margaret Larson Scholarship in memory of Lawrence Stearns. 1,200 pounds of aluminum and flux core MIG welding wire from Stoughton Trailer Company valued at approximately $4,500. School supplies for students in need from ColorCon Incorporated valued at approximately $100, and related donation budget adjustments for $725. Is that a typo? That's not the total.
No.
Okay. Move to approve budget revision and increases for CTE incentive grant in the amount of $12,174 and the corresponding expenses and to increase IDEA flow through and early childhood grants in the amount of $23,003 and the corresponding budgets totaling $35,177. Move to approve budget transfers in the amount of $400,000 to increase the deposit into Fund 46 trust account. Move approval of professional educator resignation of Marie Howard pending receipt of liquidated damages in the amount of $300. Jody Peter Schmidt pending receipt of liquidated damages in the amount of $300. Sean Stokes pending receipt of liquidated damages in the amount of $300. Eric Benedict pending receipt of liquidated damages in the amount of $600. Aaron Ninas pending receipt of liquidated damages in the amount of $600, and Deborah McElmeal pending receipt of liquidated damages in the amount of $600. Move approval of permanent professional educator contracts for Jason Becker, Jessica Brown, Nicholas Hoskins, Caitlin Maloney, Paul Ryeff, Carly Schrage, and Jenna Thiel for the 2017-2018 school year.
The consent agenda has been moved for approval. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Donna. Any discussion? Steve?
Yes. On the budget adjustment, there was a footnote about increasing $400,000. Could that be explained a little bit?
Yeah, I was actually going to ask if Erica maybe could do that.
Good evening. We talked at our Finance Committee last month about making a transfer into Fund 46 from Fund 10. Fund 46 is a fund that we have set up. We set it up a couple of years ago that essentially allows us to set aside money to address future capital needs that we have identified on our 10-year plan. And when we talked about our year end, we identified a number of places that we were under budget. And given the fact that we've been able to avoid short-term borrowing for the last few years, we felt that it was prudent to move those funds that we didn't spend in certain areas into Fund 46 to allow some flexibility in future budgeting to address the 10-year capital needs plan, or if we're in a position where we need to use those funds to allocate for existing capital projects in lieu of a chunk of our operational budget like we do on an annual basis. It would provide some flexibility in those future years.
Follow-up?
Last time we spoke, we were talking about $700,000. So
yeah, I was just pulling up on my computer. I was actually out of the country until just a few days ago, and Laura prepared this, but I believe she was probably able to transfer within. There's only the only transfer amount that needs board approval is if it's between certain function numbers. So I'm guessing the 400,000 were the transfers from places that require that official approval. But I will follow up on that and make sure, because I believe the transfer we actually made was the $700,000.
So if we vote to approve this, how do we know if it's 700 or 400?
Well, Erica can follow up, and if
Yeah.
it looks as though it should be 700, she can put that on the next consent agenda, right?
Well, what the amount that needs to be approved is based on, I'll just back up a little bit. So when the board approves the official budget, it does so, the expense budget is approved by function number, and it's at a macro level. It's either instructional, support, or other services. Any budget transfer within those three categories does not require board approval. That's based on state law. So when we have a handful of areas that are underspent, some of those transfers can occur within the function number that does not require official approval. Other transfers would require board approval, which is why I believe the amount that's here for approval is the 400,000 instead of the 7. But I will double check on that.
So 400 needs approval, 300 does not?
Correct. Correct.
Other questions?
Could we make sure we get that pointed out in 2 weeks?
Can we make sure we get one
That
pointed
the
out?
400 got transferred and the 300 also got transferred, or whatever the remaining
Yeah,
unapproved?
I'll do it when I go back to
Okay,
the seat.
that's cool.
Yeah.
Yep. It's a lot of money, and
Yep.
I just wanted to make sure, we understood.
You're right. We did, and that's why when when Joe read the amount, again, I apologize, I wasn't here. So when he read out the amount, I was just pulling it up just to make sure, because
Okay.
what we had talked about at the finance committee was to do 700,000. And I was just double checking to make sure that that's what actually occurred.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
I think this is a really prudent thing to do with basically unspent funds, because it's basically sticking it in the bank. It has to be spent on capital improvements down the road, but if we find down the road that we've had a sudden loss of revenue, which has happened in the past, this is money that's available that we don't have to go to referendum to get, or find it some other way.
Yeah.
So, or the other thing it does is it's 400,000, as you said, that we wouldn't have to take out of Fund 10 to spend on capital improvements or repairs. It's money that we can then spend on classrooms.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, other questions or comments? Okay, so there's been a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. We've had discussion. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? And the consent agenda is approved. We have two discussion items up tonight. The first is the DPI Javits grant work, and Judy Singletary and Laura Borsnick will be talking to us about that.
Good evening. It is my privilege to introduce Laura for this presentation. Setting the stage here, the Department of Public Instruction was awarded a Javits grant in order to mitigate the excellence gap for students in underrepresented populations. The Javits grant is a federal grant, and it's the only program really that addresses gifted and talented students, the only resource funding. Laura was selected to be one of 12 members of the state leadership cadre, in part as a result of being president at the time of the Greater Dane County Advanced Learners Network, and in part just from her vast experience and contribution in the field. Part of the leadership cadre role is informing school districts and school boards about the work, as well as piloting efforts to determine how we can scale it up to districts across the state as we move forward. In that effort, Laura is working with a group of elementary educators on how we can put processes in place to recognize potential in students from typically underrepresented populations, even if those children do not display traditional characteristics of gifted children in predominant populations. It's a lot of really big words. I am honored to have Laura come and speak to you because of the expertise that she offers to both state, regional, local organizations is just such a huge benefit to us and to them. So Laura's going to share this with you.
Wow, thank you very much for your time tonight. I appreciate it. I am excited to be able to share this work. Some of you have known me for a long time. I've been around the district for quite a number of years at this point. First as a substitute teacher way back when, then as the tag coordinator at Sand Hill School back when it was a 5-6 building, then at Sand Hill and River Bluff, and after our school consolidation, entirely at River Bluff. I am a strong supporter and very proud of Stoughton's history and involvement in both the philosophy and the practice of supporting inclusion in our schools. There are conversations at the state level, at the national level, and even within our district about how does gifted programming fit into an inclusive philosophy. Sometimes there's a stigma around gifted education, that it is elitist, that it serve students who maybe are already privileged, that some elite group of kids get something nicer than maybe other kids get. And so is there a place in an inclusive philosophy for gifted programming? And the answer is absolutely yes. In fact, it's an essential component because in an inclusive philosophy, we're committed to meeting the needs of all learners. And so in a strong and effective and contemporary tag program, we think about how can all students succeed? And for students who are traditionally already successful, we ask ourselves, they're successful, but are they learning and growing? Because the two are not always the same. We know from data that we can have students who are continually very high performers on assessments, but if we dig into that data, they're not growing at the same rate as their peers because they were already very high and they're given an opportunity to learn. We address that all the time in this district, and I think we've done a fantastic job. But another component is for students who, as Judy mentioned, don't necessarily meet the traditional indicators of giftedness. Maybe they aren't at the top of the advanced score on our forward and our STAR data, et cetera, but they are students of potential. So at the state and the national level, and certainly now in our district, we're really looking at what does it mean to be a student of potential, and how do we grow that potential so that those students can perform at the ability that they should be showing. So that led me into this DPI Javits grant, and it's been amazing work. So I'm currently a board member and the former president of a group called the Greater Dane County Advanced Learner Network. In many areas, the CISA in that area, so we're part of CISA 2, has a tag director that works with teachers in the districts that belong to that CISA program. Many, many years ago, as an offshoot of UW, Greater Dane County was formed as a consortium, a very collaborative network to work with tag coordinators and resource teachers in the area to figure out how do we work with parents, how do we provide programming, how do we provide professional development for teachers. So I've been a part of that group now for 15 years and had served as the president's role. I stepped down this year because the Javits grant required quite a bit of different work, and I felt I needed to focus on one or the other. So I'm still a board member, but not currently the president. Through the Greater Dane County, I have worked quite a bit with our DPI representative for Gifted. Her name is Christine Mursky. And also through UW Whitewater, which has a nationally recognized program for gifted education. Dr. Pam Klinkenbeard and Dr. Scott Peters lead that, and they are very big national names. So the Javits grant was written by Chris Mursky in collaboration with Dr. Klinkenbeard and Scott Peters from the UW, and also with the Wisconsin RTI Center. So the three formed a partnership, wrote this grant. As Judy mentioned, the Javits grant is the only federal money that's earmarked for gifted education. We don't have flow-through. We don't have any other source of funding except whatever a district may or may not, in many cases, allocate for gifted services. So they wrote a grant and they received it for $1.3 million over the course of 3 years to try to develop a model for identifying potential and serving typically underrepresented populations. Part of their model was to look for a state leadership cadre, and Chris contacted me and suggested that I apply. So I threw my hat in the ring and was fortunate to be able to be selected. We are entering our third year of the three-year grant, so it's been an amazing ride. Wow. All right. So this is a quote from our National Association for Gifted Children, NAGC, which is a powerful an organization both in terms of legislative impact and providing professional development to teachers and gifted educators across the country. And of course, they indicate that it's a matter of urgency. It's incumbent upon the field of gifted education to end with expediency the longstanding concern regarding the underrepresentation of culturally and linguistically diverse students in gifted programs. These students deserve nothing less. And that was what really started the DPI Javits grant. So the project purpose, I think, is kind of what Judy indicated, but we're looking to mitigate disproportionality in the identification of high ability, high potential students. And in this particular grant, we're really focusing on those who qualify for free or reduced lunch, who, and/or those who are English learners to reduce the resultant excellent gap. There's a lot of conversation about the achievement gap. Nationally, in school districts, the excellence gap is a little bit different. Our achievement gap looks to see how our groups of students performing. The excellence gap does too, but it's really looking at what are the statistics among students who are in our challenge programs and who end up taking the AP courses, the honors tracks, whatever high ability courses are available. Are the students in those courses, does that represent the same demographics in the rest of our district? And typically the answer is no. So the structure of the grant is that there are implementation schools and classrooms in Milwaukee, Racine, and Kenosha, because of course those are districts with large numbers of students that in other districts would be typically underrepresented. There's a district leadership cadre within each of those districts, the state leadership cadre that I am on, then there's also a strategic planning team. I don't know if you're familiar with this, I won't go into it deeply, but this is a graphic that represents Wisconsin's vision of RTI, which stands for Response to Intervention. It's kind of outdated language at this point. The state is really moving to the language of a multi-level system of support. And you can see on the outside of that graphic is a multi-level system of support. In other words, what are all the pieces that we use in our schools to help meet kids' needs? That's really all it boils down to. How do we use staff? How do we use funding? How do we use our schedule to make sure kids are getting what they need? We often affectionately call this graphic the dog dish. You can kind of see why. But the dish is wrapped in the multi-level system of support and has the components of collaboration, assessment, and high-quality instruction, all centered around culturally responsive practices. So this vision and the graphic that Wisconsin uses is really what drove our grant for the DPI. So the goals then are those three components: collaboration, assessment, and instruction. Collaboration is among school and district staff, also among students and student families. There's a considerable component of outreach to families who maybe not have had a positive relationship with schools or feel disenfranchised or marginalized, and trying to make school a very welcoming place, a very approachable place, so that it's a positive experience and they see their own children as good students who are going to be successful. Assessment is really looking at, are our assessment practices culturally responsive? Are we using measurements that actually get the data and give us students who are of potential? So we're looking at some alternative assessments. And then is our instruction going to meet the needs and show the potential that we're hoping to see? This just talks about the different project strategies, and you have access to all of those. One important component that we're using is work that was actually funded by a previous Javits grant called the U-STARS Plus program and the TOPS, the Teacher's Observation of Potential in Student. It's a curriculum program and an assessment that are meant for culturally diverse populations to show potential. So we are using those, but it is not a requirement of the Javits grant that you have to purchase those. That was never the intention. The learning that we've done over the past almost 2 years has been to understand what does it mean to be an advanced learner? What are the characteristics? What do we know about meeting the needs of advanced learners, particularly in an RTI framework? So the Wisconsin RTI Center, which has just an amazing amount of resources on their website for additional challenge. They have what's called an additional challenges tool with resources for teachers. They have really led that learning. We did a lot of work around excellence gaps and calculating RI, representational index. So in our district, we have about 25% students in poverty. In theory then, the students that we've identified as gifted, about 25% of those students should be students in poverty. That would mean that we have very equitable practices. It's difficult calculating students in poverty because that data is highly confidential and most of us don't have access to it. So that's a little bit of a challenge right there. But looking at that across ethnicities and different demographics. We've done a lot of learning around culturally responsive practices and beliefs, thinking about instructional practices that are inquiry-based and allow for eliciting at potential behaviors where we can see that potential in students, and then examining tools for collecting data. This comes out of the Wisconsin RTA Center. We use this quite a bit at River Bluff, thinking about what data do we have, what does it tell us about our students, and how does it inform our instruction, collaboration, and balanced assessment. The challenge can be in many places that what we don't look at is students who are either moderately above or well above the standard, students who are already performing higher, and thinking about how do we provide challenge in lieu of grade level activities. So in our work at the Javits sessions, we took this and then we went to a blank map and mapped out what does that look like in our district, and where are the gaps where a student who is not necessarily a high performer, but a high potential student, where might they fall through the gaps. We studied this a lot, did a lot of learning around it. The idea for informing culturally responsive practices is that teachers and districts need to have both the will, the skill, and the fill to meet the needs of all students, regardless of their background. One of the most powerful quotes I thought that we talked about, you hear a lot of districts, a lot of teachers, a lot of educational places saying, we believe all students can learn. And our conversation was, we can't, that's not good enough. We can't say all students can learn. We have to say all students must learn. And there's really a big difference in that. So for instruction, for eliciting at potential behaviors, we really dug into content. And I think this reflects a lot of the learning that we've done in our district around personalized learning, connecting to students' personal experience, focusing on big, rich ideas, those essential questions, not all, just like memorizing minutia, but how do you really think about big ideas? Using material that includes diverse voices, perspectives, and topics. Looking at our instruction, do we have inquiry-based learning opportunities? Is the instruction student-centered? Are we having a progression of complexity so we can see which students can engage at various levels? And what is our classroom climate like? So these are some of the questions that sort of drove our practice. What common ideas do we need to keep in mind so that our content, our instruction, and our classroom climates are both culturally and linguistically responsive? What unique ideas do we need to keep in mind? So for our data collection, we studied the TOPS, that's the teacher observation of potential in students, indicators. We did a lot of teacher training. We did classroom observation, and then kind of took from a classroom list of students who are demonstrating behaviors of potential, kind of drilled down, and then so these are the students we really want to focus on individually and nurture that potential. So for the project, our next step is to examine data from the demonstration schools. They are primarily third grade classrooms in Milwaukee, Racine, and Kenosha. The developer of TOPS is now using part of the grant money to develop e-TOPS, so we would have an electronic observation tool, which would be really nice. And then we're looking at venues for rolling this out statewide, which leads into the work that I am working on right now, is how can we use this information to inform our practice in our own district? How do we make it manageable in classrooms? It can't be another thing to do. First of all, it's not authentic and genuine, and secondly, nobody has time for any other thing to do. And what professional development is needed for teachers to understand and implement these practices? So we started a pilot. I worked with Judy and was fully supported by Judy and by Trish Gates, my own principal at River Bluff. And we sent out an open invitation to second and third grade teachers and said, who wants to learn about this with us? Who's willing to jump in and pilot some of these practices? So I'm collaborating with Chris Keenan, our elementary tech coordinator, and we have a team of 3 teachers, I believe one from each school. 1 second grade and 2 third grade teachers. We've been working this summer on some of the learning around gifted practices, on potential, studying the top, studying some of the other scales that we use, studying what inquiry practices look like. And now we are planning, Tricia supported me in giving me some release time to go to the elementary schools. So Chris and I will be going into these elementary classrooms to get to know the students, to be collecting data. The teachers are collecting data, and we're going to support the teachers in implementing some inquiry-based activities at certain points throughout the year, and watching to see what students do we notice that maybe we hadn't noticed before, and how are we going to nurture that potential. So we're really looking right now at year-long implementation and data collection, but then also thinking about how do we roll this out? What information would other teachers need to know to maybe shift their own focus and their own identification practices and some instructional practices so we can see some of those potentials, and then to nurture those long-term with the idea that hopefully if we start when they're very young and build that positive feeling about school and feeling about being smart and feeling about wondering is a huge part of it, that we will see a change in our representation in our high ability classes down the road. So thank you for your time tonight. I know you have a busy schedule. Are there any questions that I can answer? Yeah.
Steve, so you mentioned that we have a roughly 25% economically disadvantaged students. Have you looked, you said it's really hard to tell, but do you have a feel for what the number might be based on the information you do have?
Any number that I can have is truly on my gut.
Okay.
And so it's super unscientific, and we know that the data nationwide shows that it's not necessarily the students that we always think it is. So that I can't do. We did some calculation for students of different ethnic backgrounds and our students who are English language learners. And I would say that I was looking, because of my role, primarily at our 6, 7, 8 population. So those are mostly students who are identified in elementary, and others that we've either caught or have moved in. And we do have representational discrepancies. They're not as large as in some places, but it certainly exists.
Do you feel then that you need to have that information to show that, you know, going into the pilot, you would need to know that so that when you're done with the pilot, you can say, aha, this is... Yeah.
Right. We won't get that information, unfortunately. And that's been a huge barrier, and maybe showed a disconnect in those who wrote the grant. Thought it was easier for teachers to know who those students were, and that was a piece of warning on their part that we don't know, and which is an okay thing. But we are looking at our English language learners primarily, and then students of ethnic minority.
Other questions?
Yeah, so,
thanks.
oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
So I guess this is kind of going along with Steve's question, but do you expect there to be some sort of metrics, a way of assessing the success of programs like these in the long run? You mentioned studies, or like the study focusing a lot on Milwaukee and Racine and Kenosha. Is that aspect of, is that tied specifically to this grant as well?
Yes.
Okay, and
Right.
so do you guys expect to get, you've mentioned that they've been collecting data, and I assume that they'll assess data at some point. Are there metrics that they expect to use to be able to judge how effective these methods have been?
My understanding is there are. I couldn't speak to them in detail, but that is part of the grant, is to look both short-term and long-term, and they have consistent measures that they're using. So I'm assuming that it is included in that. They're also measuring just some information about teachers, which wasn't necessarily the original part of the grant, but I would say I've seen the same thing here in terms of understanding about what behaviors of potential look like, and thinking about reflecting on that. How does that pair with your own classroom practice? So they ended up kind of adding in some surveys with teachers about kind of, what did I think about practice before? What did I think about gifted education and practice after? And I think that those are going to be an important outcome as well.
Okay.
If that answers your question.
Anyone else? I've got a couple. First of all, recognizing that giftedness is not a yes or no question. It happens on a spectrum.
Absolutely.
For our district, do you have a rough percentage of our student population which has been identified as gifted?
So the answer to that is yes. But there's 5 areas of giftedness. Mostly what we focus on tends to be specific academic ability, typically reading, language arts, and math. But there's also leadership, there's creativity, there's visual performing arts. So in our district, we have approximately 7%, 8% identified, but that's if you include all of those 5 areas of giftedness. In any particular area, it's about 3%.
And is that consistent with what you'd expect out of a state population or national population?
Typically, yes.
Okay. So
But
if...
typically maybe in an old view, too. That's truly students who are exhibiting those behaviors already. Like, we can measure those already. They're performing, they're high performers on tests, and so we've been able to identify them. So in that way of identifying gifted, I would say we're very much within line within the state and the national level.
So the things that can be measured on a standardized test, in other words. Okay. But then with regard to the other 2 categories, those presumably are harder to identify?
Absolutely.
How does that happen?
And when you say the other 2 categories?
Artistic giftedness, leadership giftedness. I think that's what you said.
Yeah, leadership, creativity, visual and performing arts. Those, our district is not alone in continuing to work on what that looks like. In our district, as students come into the middle school, we have a screener that I give to all of our teachers. They collect data on students who are exhibiting characteristics of leadership. And then as we see students who are identified in several different categories, then we kind of drill down and do some individual data collection on that student. And then as leadership opportunities come up, we funnel them to them. It's not a very perfect system. There's a lot of discussion at the state level. How much energy and resources do we want to funnel into identification, unless we also have resultant programming. If we want to identify a pool of a population and then say, great, we know you're gifted, so we can put a check in that box, but we have nothing for you, that's an issue as well.
Right.
So the 2 kind of go hand in hand. We continue to develop our identification process as we're able to continue to provide more and more opportunities. We've done some work on the visual and performing arts. Some of that sat on the wayside last spring. We started to kind of resurrect it, and we're working on that again. I think the visual and performing arts staff do an amazing job. They know who their gifted students are. What we don't have, I think, is maybe communication, consistent documentation. They know who they are, but maybe the rest of the system doesn't know that information. So I don't think it's as much a change in practice as it is a change in communication and documentation.
Just one last question. Do you have any readily available documentation that sort of outlines the learning and planning that the teachers did throughout the summer to be able to implement this program?
For this pilot?
Uh-huh.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Would you be able to send that to us? I'd just be curious to look at it.
Absolutely. I'd be
Thanks.
happy to. Yeah, great group of, very small group of very dedicated, passionate educators. I'm excited.
Awesome.
Anybody else? Okay, thanks very much,
Okay,
Laura.
thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. So the next item up for discussion is the compensation committee and next steps. Sarah Robb is the chair of the employee relations committee, and normally I would ask her to kick off the discussion, but she's out of town, so I'll do that. Everybody got an email from me last week, excuse me, kind of outlining the history of how we got to where we are right now. And I'm not going to recapitulate all of that, but just very briefly for the benefit of the people who are here who didn't get that email. The school board, along with the SEA, decided about 4 years ago that we needed to develop a new compensation model. That was driven at the time in large part by finances. A compensation committee was put together at that time, comprised mostly of educators, and that committee worked for, as I recall, about a year to present a plan which was, or to develop a plan which was presented to the board in April of 2015. The board approved it in May of 2015. And within a very short period of time, like within a few months, it became very apparent that there were some problems with that plan that were identified by staff, by administration, and the board recognized that and took the action of asking that committee to reconvene for the purpose of identifying modifications to the compensation plan that the board approved, and which is still the only plan that we have approved and in place right now. We hired the Woods Communications Group to facilitate the work of, at the time, of how the board and the district can do a better job of rolling out and implementing major changes such as a change in how we compensate our educational staff. That communications group has been working with the compensation committee for the last roughly 18-20 months. And early on in the process, as we were getting updates, when I say we, I mean the board, was getting updates from this committee, it became apparent early on that the compensation committee had undertaken to write a whole new compensation plan. The board did not interfere with that. The board has let that committee do its work. The only action that I think we've taken as a board is to get updates and try to see that the process finishes. A month ago, before the last Employee Relations Committee meeting, the Employee Relations Committee was informed that it looked like the committee's work had really come to a standstill. That there were issues that the committee was not able to come to consensus agreement on, and that it appeared that the compensation committee was not going to be able to come up with a compensation plan in the foreseeable future. That agreement couldn't be arrived at in the foreseeable future. So the Employee Relations Committee then unanimously voted to recommend to this board that the board direct the compensation committee to work on modifications to the plan that we have in place. And we know that there are things that need to change. Everybody on the board, I think, agrees with that. I think the vast majority of teachers and administration agree that there are some problems with the plan that we have right now and it needs to be modified. It is also felt, it was also determined by the Employee Relations Committee that that work should be done without the facilitation of Woods Communications. Dr. Onsager informs me that so far we have paid them about $70,000 for their work in this process. We have also had to bring in substitute teachers for the teachers that are on the compensation committee to meet periodically, and that of course comes at some cost to the district as well. I want to clarify what I think is a misperception that's been floating around. The ERC is not saying, is not recommending, and has not recommended to the board that the ERC undertake the work of modifying the compensation plan. The ERC is recommending to the board that the board direct the compensation committee to cease its efforts at developing a new plan and instead look at the plan we've got right now, suggest modifications, recommend them to the ERC. The ERC then would, in all likelihood, pass those recommendations on to the board, and that process take place without the facilitation of Wood Communications. So, with that, I would open that topic up for discussion among the board members. Joe?
Can somebody that knows this information explain to the board why the recommendation is to not use woods going forward?
Sure, Allison?
One of the reasons was partially because it seemed that the committee had come to, the compensation committee had come to an impasse, and that Woods Communication had not seemed to be working anymore to be able to make that decision or that direction any clearer for the committee. And it had been, like Scott said, that it had been fairly expensive, and that we weren't sure that we were getting the benefit out of it, that, you know, potentially there was some benefit at the time, but now we are not getting to where we need to be. Donna, is that where you understood it?
Yeah, and I think there might be a little bit more. I mean, I think the original intent, as we were led to believe, was that there was more about the process of making big decisions and how we implement them. How the current compensation plan was rolled out, the execution was not good. I think everyone is willing to, I mean, will admit that. And so they were really brought in to not only facilitate what changes could be made to the plan to make it better, but also to help make the district make decisions that could be used as a model for other types of these things that had to happen. And that work has just not come up. I mean, we haven't, nothing has happened there. I also, I know that the many times that I've actually checked into that the portal that we have, it's usually pretty far out of date. Not always has the most current information. And, you know, when you look at $70,000, I look at that as that's a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, there's the sub costs, but we also have just the costs of, I mean, what about the cost to our kids who these teachers that have been working so hard have not, they're not in the classroom because they've been doing this. I think there's a lot of things to, you know, to consider, but I think that the general consensus was that, look, we need some help here, we need some direction, because we can't continue in the same direction that we're going.
And also, wasn't it, and now I can't remember what it was, that this isn't really Woods Communications' area of expertise? This is not typically the type of consulting that they do. This was a little bit outside sort of what they had done before. That was the other thing I had taken away from that.
Well, I guess my follow-up then is, if we were to decide to terminate our relationship with Woods in this regard, who would then facilitate this work?
In speaking with the administrators who presented to the Employee Relations Committee, it was felt that the types of changes that have been identified with as necessary to this plan, ones that have been identified so far and that could come up in the future, that discussion could happen without having an outside facilitator. Now, if it looks like that's not working, certainly we can revisit that issue. Does that answer your question?
One of them, I have.
Okay, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
No,
Could I just-
probably other
just
people.
a follow-up to that. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't even believe that the terminating the Woods contract is really a part of our decision process, because I don't think that we actually approve that or disapprove that.
Well, it was just to not have them involved in the continuing work on the compensation plan.
But it's not something that we actually vote on, I don't believe.
The board?
I thought we did.
Tim, I thought we
No, I
did
thought we
approve that
did.
contract.
We approved the contract, yes.
Right, so the board would have to decide.
I'll have to look, because I can't remember if the board approved it. Normally, consultants, and they were hired as a consultant, normally that does not go to the board
Okay.
for an approval of the contract.
So-
Unless it's a huge dollar amount
Right.
type of figure.
So you wouldn't need approval from the board for that particular part of the recommendation?
I think it was just part of the whole,
Yeah.
the direction that we were recommending
Right.
needed to take place.
Right. So you had another question?
Oh, a lot. I guess I just want to go sort of back to basics with this, and not having been privy to any of these discussions, I want to know basically what happened. I mean, were there two camps? Was there a camp that wanted to come up with a different model and a camp that wanted to fix the model that we have, and that then became the impasse, or?
My
I just want some
understanding,
background.
and I'm not part of the committee, so I wasn't involved in the discussions either, but my understanding is this committee and working with the Woods have worked extremely hard. And they thought that they had an idea of where they wanted to go. And then they got to a point, I believe last spring, where looking at the route they were going down, and they were going down a point system type of thing, and putting more points on your classroom, or how you're meeting the expectations of your job function. My understanding is at their last meeting, they got to the point that that avenue that they were going down, they didn't think was A, feasible to logistically manage, and B, they didn't think that was any better than what they're currently doing. So that's how the committee left into the summer. And my understanding is this committee is working really hard, and I think there's a lot of rumors and there's a lot of different things swirling out there. Take, for example, tonight with the misunderstanding that the committee would not be involved. So there's a lot of different things swirling out there. I think what the committee needs is the committee needs some direction from the board of saying, this is what we want you to focus your energy on. And if that energy is to continue to focus on what they've been doing, I think that's a clear message the board needs to send of saying, we understand that you're tired and you've done a lot of work and we appreciate that, but we'd like you to keep plugging away and try to come up with something. I think that's what they're looking for, is what direction does the board want them to take? Because whatever direction or whatever they do is going to have a lot of energy put into it, and there's got to be some tough conversations, and there's some decisions to be made. So I think that's what they're looking for, is some direction from the board of, are we on the right track? Do you want us to do something different? They don't want to spend all this time and energy spinning the wheels if that's not what the board wants. Does that make sense?
It does. I'm just having a hard time because, I mean, we're being asked to make a decision based on conversations we weren't a part of, and one of the speakers tonight referenced a meeting that they have on the books that this person at least thought was a productive direction. So it doesn't seem like everybody thinks that they're at an impasse. I'm just trying to understand, I guess, the whole picture, and I don't feel like I necessarily am.
My perspective on going back to the current scheme is, the data shows there's 70 to 80% of the staff did not like the current scheme. And so I'm trying to figure out how successful the committee would be going back to something that has that much disdain. How are you going to, what lipstick are you going to put on that pig to make it look good? Because I don't know that it's going to be doable.
I think you're misreading what that survey says. First of all, that survey was a couple of years ago. And since this plan was put into place, we've hired new staff. 35% of our current teaching staff were hired under this current plan. They didn't even take place in that survey, or take part in that survey. Secondly, what that survey said was that 70-odd% of respondents, and not everybody responded, but it was a pretty good rate, 70-odd% said that the plan needed significant revisions. Nobody in this room disagrees with that proposition.
So
I think-
why would we go back to it if it needs, I guess when we talked about facilitation, we talked about the expense of teacher subs, we talked about the amount of time it's taken to get to where we're at today, which is basically we're back at zero. Oh, well, we kind of are back at zero, Scott. You're shaking your head.
Yeah,
But we're back at replacing a compensation plan that hasn't worked really well for a lot of people.
Okay. Then let's talk about the alternatives that we have before us, and Tim outlined those. We can replace the current system, which is what the committee's been working on for the last 18, 20 months. And they tell us, that means the Employee Relations Committee, they are saying, we're at a standstill. We do not believe that we can achieve a consensus recommendation to present to the board. That's what they've been saying. And I haven't heard that from just one person on that committee. Even when Lynn Woods has presented, she has, when asked, how close are you? How much longer do you think this is going to take? Her response has been, I don't know. I don't know. So, it's not fair to people to have this process drag out indefinitely. So, first alternative is to just keep going down the road we've been on. Second alternative is just get rid of the system, in which case we don't have a compensation plan. Third alternative is what the ERC is recommending, which is tell the committee to fix what we have instead of coming up with something new. And the fourth alternative is whatever anybody else can suggest. We have to have a compensation plan. I don't know how you'd hire new staff when they ask, okay, how do I move through the pay scale, and you don't have an answer for them.
Well,
so we've got to have something. We've got something right now.
And
the effort to replace the something we have now, we're being told, is at a standstill.
Anecdotally, may I just say that I'm not sure a new employee knows how they get through the current compensation plan, because anecdotally, it's subjective and it's not very transparent.
It's certainly not perfect. Nobody's going to disagree with that.
So I'm stating my position.
Sure.
So don't go back to the current plan.
So,
Tim.
So my understanding is the compensation committee had the opportunity to create a new plan. If they came to the board with a plan that was sort of going back to more of a steps and lanes approach, would that be acceptable? Or is the steps and lanes still off the table? Because my understanding is that the original charge given, this is my understanding of the compensation committee when this all started, was that wasn't an option. But is that an option? Is that back on the table?
No, it really isn't, because that's what started this effort in the first place, is that steps and lanes for this district was not financially sustainable. And I don't know that there's a district in the state that is doing things the way they were 6-7 years ago prior to Act 10.
Well, I said this a few weeks ago, or when we first started talking about it. I'm not suggesting it's going to be exactly the way that it is, but I do know of a lot of districts that do have steps and lanes as their foundation, and they've taken that and they've added some elements of a career ladder. I think when we think of compensation plan, I think we have to clarify steps and lanes is a compensation plan. Career ladder is a compensation plan. So it's not compensation plan, steps and ladders. Because compensation plan is how we're deciding how we are splitting up the funds to pay our employees. I'll be real candid with you. I'm confused. I've worked very hard to try to understand this process, and so it's easier for me to just say this is where my position is. I think we need to really look back at a steps and lanes approach. I disagree. I do think there are ways to do it that is economically sustainable. I question whether the current compensation plan is economically sustainable. In fact, I think in many cases it gives us tools to manage decline better than it does to create long-term economic sustainability. I think we have to be looking more and spending our time more on how we're going to pump more money into the system, which I think is the largest issue here. And when I say steps and lanes, I'm not saying we should go back to exactly the way that it was. There are fundamental flaws with that. However, right now for me it seems like it's about the only fair way for us to move forward. Right now, this is, in my opinion, based on what I'm hearing, is this is something we've got to get figured out pretty quick. And if the compensation committee is at an impasse, that's concerning to me. I think that there are fairly easy solutions to this if we can sit down and have the different options put back on the table, such as that. So that's my position. People can disagree with it, but I'm not buying that we can't find a way to do it where it isn't economically sustainable. I'm just not. I've done my research on this, and I've seen other districts that are doing it. It is a shift from what it was before. So that's where I'm at with this. I have some other things, but I'm going to leave it at that and continue to let the discussion continue.
Okay. Anybody else?
Well, I do have something to tie into Tim's. When we talk about sustainability, there is the fiscal responsibility, and that's a sustainable component, and that's what we heard, that steps and lanes is not fiscally sustainable. But the other part, there's, the social aspect of sustainability to our district and to the community as a whole. And when we're losing teachers, teachers who have been here a long time, and we're losing that experience, and we heard people in the public comment period. And, I've, during my campaign, heard this a lot, that there's willingness to go above and beyond the fiscal concern because it's a benefit to our community to have strong district administration teacher relationship. When we lose the teachers, we lose a lot. And I just don't know, I don't know how to make it happen either. I kind of thought that the plan that Wood Communications Group was working on had some business-like components, and I'm used to that. So maybe that freaked a few people out, that it looked a little bit too much like business. Anyway, there's more to it than just the fiscal part. That's my point there.
Agreed, John.
Yeah, I believe that there's more to this than the fiscal aspect as well, and I think that the compensation committee, having been working for the past year, is a sign that all stakeholders are interested in coming to some sort of communal conclusion that benefits everybody. I know that it's in the district's interest, that it's in the kids' interest, and that it's in educators' interest for us to come up with a way of compensating our teachers. So my confusion is on the specifics of why we feel there is an impasse and what issues there are that are keeping us from building a consensus. And when we talk about this issue, we talk a lot in the abstract about where the compensation committee is and that they might be stuck. But I wish that we had specifics. We had the specifics in front of us over what issues we feel like they're stuck on, because I think that the risk that we have then is then also talking about something like steps and lanes just as an alternative, whereas I feel like they've done work for a year. There must be something that we can gather that would be constructive out of all of this. I feel like the board could make our decision based on understanding the specifics of the progress that they've made and the specifics of the troubles that we're having overcoming. Or that's what would make me comfortable in making a recommendation or making a vote on what aspects of this process we should change is understanding the specifics of the process or the progress that the compensation committee has made.
I agree.
Sure, Alice.
What is the date of this next meeting? I heard it was in 2 weeks. What is?
21st, I think it is, no?
No, 24th.
The 24th
Right.
of this month.
Right.
Okay.
Sorry.
I guess, I'm kind of listening to all of this discussion, and a couple of things that really stood out. One, the fact that you were saying it's 30% of
About 35%.
of 35%, so it's even more than I had remembered, are new. And I don't know if that means they're like brand new to teaching, or if they are coming from other places, probably a combination of both. But it is concerning, just even tonight, looking at the number of resignations, and staff are saying that they're leaving because of the compensation plan. And personally, I have a friend who left the district because of that. And so I do think we do need to look at, obviously, something. I really am curious. I really want to see what's going to come from the meeting on the 24th, because it seems like, it sounds like staff, at least those who have been speaking, are feeling that there's something more coming up. It would be good to have that information available for us for our next meeting.
Well, I just want the board to focus on the question of the recommendation. The question is not what compensation plan does the board think we should have, or what should it look like. The question is, should we tell the committee to stop trying to design a new one, which doesn't, after all this time, doesn't seem to be getting anywhere, and people are getting burned out, etc. Or do we want them to instead focus on repairing the plan that we've got right now? That's really the only thing that we have to worry about. John?
I agree completely with that being the imperative to the board. I'm wondering if there's a way for us, if what we're saying is that the compensation committee might be lacking direction, or that might be what has been driving this impasse, would there be a way for us to give them direction for this upcoming meeting to find some way to collect and summarize their status, where they're at, where they see the biggest problems and the biggest drawbacks being, and report that to the board, so that we have in front of us some sort of tangible evidence of their current situation, and we can then make our decision on what direction to give them to move forward with.
Can I maybe ask Becky and Erica, having heard that, is that something that you think the committee could identify for the board, or before our next meeting on the 28th? Like, where are the agreements and how many points of disagreement are there? That's more or less what you're asking, John, isn't it?
Yeah, and even if it's not like a numbers thing, I'm not expecting it to be a numbers thing. I would like, though, since the committee is reporting to the Employee Relations Committee, or since the Employee Relations Committee is making this recommendation to us, and we seem to all feel that we don't have enough information or enough understanding of the specifics of where the Compensation Committee is struggling to come to consensus, I feel like it would be useful for us as a school board, before we make this vote, to have the Compensation Committee themselves, as a collective body, try to summarize the differences that they feel are most sensitive.
The only thing that I would caution us about with respect to that is, this committee's been working, most of it, for the last few years. And I don't want us to try to micromanage what they've done, because they know a whole lot more about the process and everything than we do. I don't want them to come back, for example, with what you're asking for, and then our discussion to turn into, well, let's decide to do this thing and let's decide to do that thing, where they can't come to agreement, because I know you're not suggesting that.
Yeah, no, I absolutely, I'm not interested in us like refining some sort of policy and then pushing it back onto them, or any sort of prerogative. Even if this summary is in an abstract, the Compensation Committee's feelings of their own progress and the types of direction that they themselves feel would be useful and would allow them to best move forward in bringing a plan that's achieved consensus in front of us.
Becky?
I just wanted to mention that one of the techniques that the boards did use is, as we were going through this work, they would ask
Would you maybe come up to the mic, because we're also live.
I just wanted to share that one of the things that the Woods would do during the meeting is we'd be discussing whatever, and Lynn would stop, and she asked us to go around the committee, and one by one, we needed to, identify whether or not it was something we could live with, something we didn't, what our thoughts were, where we were at this time. All of that was captured. I mean, they do a fantastic job of capturing every word, I think, that was said, and there are minutes. So my only point was, I believe we can do that, and I also think, I don't know, I have no idea how many people can or cannot come to that meeting on the 24th.
Okay.
But if the attendance is poor, there are notes, so that would be something we could go back and look at too.
Does that help, John?
Yeah, certainly that helps. I mean, I think if as a board, we could all receive at least direction to the same information to try and assess for ourselves, or if the compensation committee is able to try and summarize that stuff for us themselves, that would be fantastic. But otherwise, I want to make sure that we're all looking at the same stuff. And
sure.
With that in mind, was March 13th the last meeting? Okay, so the information on the compensation committee website is the last ERC update was March 13th.
Well, it might have been the last
ERC update, and before that was December, and then there's a March 20th and a May 1st school board update. But those aren't meeting minutes, or so maybe that could get updated, and then we can.
That website is the Woods.
That's it. Okay, so March 13th ERC update, and then December was the previous update. So if there's work done between it.
I think you're maybe misunderstanding.
yeah, they're saying
The compensation committee has met since March.
I get that.
Right.
There's no meeting minutes on the website, to Donna's point
Right.
earlier.
And we don't control that, and they don't control that.
All right, so all I'm asking for is, could we please, to John's point, get the information? I heard it was all on the website. It's not all on the website, to Donna's point. John wants the data. Donna says it's not there. I agree it's not there. Can we get it there? That's all I'm asking for.
Katie just reminded me, she doesn't normally put things out until the committee approves the previous meeting's minutes. So the meeting we had in May, we haven't met yet to approve those, so that's probably why they're not.
Okay. So when will we get the most recent information to address John's concerns, which I agree with? It'd be nice to see it all before we're being asked to do something.
Okay, just hang on. Can you get that to us before the next meeting, do you believe? Okay. You're nodding your head yes.
I am, yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I was trying to find something. Do you think we can get that information to the board? Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so that's a yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
And those are the two, I mean, the reason we're looking to those two is they have to be, only two that I see here that are on the committee. There are other educators, but Katie and Chris are on the board.
Okay. Okay. Tim, did you have something?
Yeah, I just want to, I think this is great, but I'm still, I'm fearing that if we don't give this committee a little more flexibility to look at other options, it feels to me and I hate to use the word steps and lanes because sometimes it feels like it's being taken as if it's a bad thing, and I don't think it is. We don't at least give them some flexibility to incorporate some of the elements of that. I'm not sure how you come up with a plan, and I've studied this plan pretty closely, how you come up with a plan that's much different than the one that currently exists if you don't have that flexibility of trying to look at some of that stuff. So I think it's great. I think the committee should continue to work. I'm just worried that they don't have enough flexibility. This isn't I actually would disagree. I don't think we're even close to micromanaging. I don't think they have any flexibility outside of to come up with a plan that's a modification of the current plan as their new plan. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I am. But I'm getting the sense that might be where the impasse is that the plan If they're creating a new plan, it's just, there's really not many options outside of what currently exists. It sounds like the point system, from what I'm understanding, might replace the colors. But I just don't really know how that's much different. It's points instead of colors. And that's just one example. So I'm all for moving forward. I just would like to give this committee a lot more flexibility to come to us with the notion we need to be thinking about economic sustainability. We need to try to, it can't be the same old that it was, but I would like to give this committee a lot more flexibility.
Well, in response, the compensation committee, the first time it started work several years ago, and the second time that we sent them to look at modifying this plan, were given certain parameters within which they were supposed to work. One of the things that our compensation plan is supposed to reflect is, to maybe grossly oversimplify things, but it's to reflect how well a teacher does his or her job. How well are they teaching? How are they impacting the rest of the district? And steps and lanes never did reflect that. Steps and lanes was, if you can keep your job, in other words, if you don't get fired, which is pretty hard to do, you will move through the pay scale. That's all there was to it. How well you did in the classroom was no reflection on, had no bearing on that. That is something that our taxpayers, that our kids, our parents, that's something that they want us to do, is to look at the performance of our staff.
Okay.
And no, let me finish. That's one of the things that the plan has to reflect. Steps and lanes did not do that. And if you're going to start to come up with a steps and lanes like plan that also takes account of how well people are doing what we expect of them, then it's going to start looking a lot more like what we do have actually. So that's just one of the parameters within which the committee was supposed to work.
So, with all due respect, I just stated numerous times, I think we can create a steps and ladders model that incorporates some of that into it. So I've said 3 times tonight now, I'm not suggesting we go back to the exact same way it was that you claimed before. I do have fundamental problems in general when we use staff performance to determine pay, and I want to tell you why. Schools often are told if we operated more like a business, things would be fine. And my sister works in the corporate world. I had a good talk with her this weekend, and one of the things she said is that I get my raise based on performance, and that performance is based on the fact that our company's making monetary profit. Schools don't have that option. We don't get to bring in more revenue. So by my calculation, in order for, if we're using performance to help indicate how much a staff member gets paid, for us to stay within our budget, we're going to need a critical amount of staff who are underperforming. It seems like that. Because otherwise we won't be able to make budget. I have a fundamental problem with that. With two kids in this district, even that idea that, well, you know, the community, I don't know that the community is expecting this. I have not heard that. I've talked to a lot of community members. So there's districts that are moving away from that. Janesville, I believe, just recently did. I have huge concerns with it, because to me that's not sustainable. So again, I want to say that it seems to me like for it to work and for us to stay within our budget, we have to have certain staff, a number of staff that are underperforming. Correct? Because we can't bring in more revenue. Where in the corporate world, as my sister was explaining, they bring in a profit. So that's based. There's a correlation between performance of employees and bringing in a profit. And they can make that correlation and then evaluate people based on performance, but it doesn't seem like that's possible. So this whole evaluation and performance indicating or determining pay it's a slippery slope. I understand it's happening, it's there, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't incorporate some of it, but I think if that's the only reason we're doing, now I'm a little more confused as to why we're doing it. Is it economically sustainable? Is it because the community wants this? And so, like I said, I continue to get, as I ask questions, I sometimes continue to get more confused. So when that happens, I tend to think that maybe it's best to go back to a model everybody knows and then try to continually improve it. So, you know, again, that was where I continue to stand.
Donna, we haven't heard from you.
Well, I have heard a lot of things tonight. And part of some of the updates that we got at the ERC were that there was the belief that there were some fundamental things, some small things, I don't want to say small, but some, I guess they are fundamental things that we could change that would make this easier. One is to remove the redlining option, which if you do that, and if you look at the compensation plan, to me that looks pretty much like steps and lanes then, because you just continually move through. I think that we've kind of heard that maybe that's something people could live with. Also, I mean, I think we've heard that we need to figure out some way to make there be more emphasis on classroom, and that really does have, you know, is very important. And I believe that there is a way to make the existing plan focus on classroom as well. One thing I do have an issue with when I hear performance and evaluation, the career plan does not actually focus on evaluation at all. Right. Janesville is moving away from what I understand and what I've read, is moving away from their compensation plan, which is based on the state evaluation plan. Ours is not. In fact, it has no bearing, except you have a rating of a 1, which we know if you have a rating of a 1, there are some significant issues. It was more about developing and professionally growing, which I think who would not want that? And so I still think that there are ways that we could change the plan to make it easier. I think the fact that the employee or the compensation committee that has had such a tough time is it's sort of like the repeal and replace issue that Tim, you know, had mentioned about healthcare. It's really hard, and these folks are getting really burned out. I think they just needed to, and I think they've had a lot of flexibility, to be honest. I mean, they wanted to redo the plan. As I remembered, it was just to fix some of the things that needed to be fixed, and it became a brand new plan, but they continued to work that way and nobody stopped them. To me, that seemed like that was a lot of that was flexible. And now they've gotten to a point where they can't, and from what, you know, I think the general consensus for what we were told at the Employee Relations Committee is, we're tired, we just need to tell us what, you know, like what could you live with, or let us, you know, give us some direction so that we can just move forward. With all of that being said, I also believe we have to let this thing play out a little bit. We've made a lot of rash decisions on not a lot of time to, I mean, nobody has made less money ever since this has been implemented. I mean, there's people that have made more money. People have gotten raises. I don't think there's anyone that has not made, you know, has gone backward. And that was a fundamental, I mean, right from the start, we said that's not something the board will live with. We won't let this happen. And I'll just go back, the execution, I think this really has a lot to do with how this whole thing was executed and the communication around it. I think we all understand that, and I think everyone's learned from it. I think we also learned that our administrators needed some experience evaluating, because those evaluations had not been occurring on a regular basis and had not been consistent. We learned a lot of things during that process, hopefully things that have made us all better as a system. We found out that, you know, I know there were instances of staff who the administrator did not know what they did. They went back and they explained it, and they were moved to where they thought they should be. And so I think that the system was working. I just think we need to give it some time, along with making some of these changes that would make people happier.
Anybody else? Yeah, Joe.
Well, I will say that what Tim is proposing appeals to me quite a bit, you know, this modified steps and lanes idea. And one of the reasons that it does is that I think these evaluations have been a large part of the problem with the plan that we have. We just have too many different people evaluating too many teachers. They don't know, in a lot of cases, what they do. And when you have that many different people, they're going to evaluate people differently. They're just going to. And, you know, the steps and lanes model, it's predictable. You know that you're going to move. And right now, that's appealing to me, based on a lot of the problems that we've got with the current model.
I'm assuming everybody read the Aaron Nunez letter? Mm-hmm. To Joe's point about subjectivity and who's reviewing and evaluating, and she makes some solid points here that she had all this extra work that she did that didn't even get considered in the evaluation. And she cited that as one of, you know, a main part of her resigning. So I agree with Joe. I think it's, you know, it wouldn't be easy to have one principal do an evaluation on all of their teaching staff, but it also can't be a mixed match of people not knowing what that professional person is having the responsibility of an evaluation. So, you know, if that's one of the aspects that we go back to and look at the subjectivity of how you move through, or the subjectivity on who's evaluating without an awareness of what that teacher's doing. Yeah, I would support those two areas of improvement.
Okay. The one thing that I want to mention, since we're talking about some sort of more predictable system that weights less of a raise in performance and more of a raise in sort of expected and understood performance. If the district, or if whoever assesses that you did a good job, you get a standard raise. I think the last time, or all of the times I've seen the compensation committee present to us, that has been the predictable, every year everybody gets a standard raise, has been weighted as a really important component of a plan that they would be close to adopting. Am I wrong in saying that? Have they not presented that to us? I feel like I don't want to quote a number, but I thought like some sort of 70% bucket in terms of the raise that, or the potential raise that somebody could get was on a chart or something.
I can't address that particular number, but I can tell you that since this plan has been in place, because I've been on the ERC that whole time, everybody has gotten a pay increase, unless you were a brand new hire, or if you were on an improvement plan. And I think we've only had a few people where the latter was the case. But I mean, everybody got a raise. Last year, I think it was 2%. The year before that, I think it was 2.5% or something like that. I don't remember the numbers precisely. Some people got a little bit bigger raise than others, but yeah, everybody got a raise.
So I'm sorry to interrupt. So that's a step, right? If every year you're here, you get a raise, right?
Yeah. So
well, it's based on that's based on what the district or what the board felt the district could afford in terms of increased compensation.
Yeah, but at least if I'm here and I've been here 5 years, I get a raise, cost of living raise or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to look at it retrospectively.
So that's a step, though. I think that's where we just get. My feeling on this is we've gotten too bogged in semantics, steps and lanes versus career ladder, and I think there are elements of steps and lanes within this current model we could
Right, by
Right.
taking the redlining out and
Yeah.
removing the
I mean,
caps.
yes.
I mean, that, is it
Yeah.
that simple?
What,
It could be, I mean,
So, I mean, then, so,
but I don't know. I'm still learning.
Okay, hang on, one at a time.
so the point that I was trying to make and that I wanted to mention is we spend a lot of time debating the specifics of steps and lanes, but I feel like the compensation committee has presented in front of us several times now and mentioned that some sort of that the district expects that if you're teaching in the district from year to year that you're performing well, that you're a good teacher, that you're doing your job, and that you're going to be rewarded for doing that, and everybody will have some sort of baseline compensation, and then there might be some slice of the potential money or of the pool that we can increase our wage or increase people's wages by that we divvy up in a different manner. I want to be clear that the compensation committee, I think, is from what I've seen, has expressed that that's the they want a lot of the whatever plan we come up with to be structured that way. So when we talk about, we seem to talk about steps and lanes as if it's like a totally different thing, but like if it's not a totally different thing, I don't know why we need to talk about it. If what we want to say is that we want to ensure that from year to year, educators who do well, which the district is assuming that they're doing well if they're still teaching here, get some sort of standard, however we want to structure it, raise. I feel like that's the way that we should talk about it. Not in terms of steps and lanes, because then we start debating whether or not we should do steps and lanes, and that's most of our fighting ends up being over that.
Sure, and to your point, when these last few years, I mean, since Act 10 happened, which obviously completely changed the way financing gets done for us. Well, not Act 10, Act 35, actually. Since then, when Erica has drawn up prospective budgets, there's been a built-in amount that we believe we can budget for pay increases. And, you know, based on present revenue, head count, et cetera, that's a reasonable assumption. The problem with having a preset schedule, such as what we used to have, is, well, you know, what happens if we get another $400 per student cut in state revenue? You know, we got to find that money somewhere, and that's one of the ways in which the old steps and lanes could become unsustainable. If you have a sudden change in revenue stream, how do we overcome that?
Yeah, and just to piggyback off that, I personally fully understand how the finances of an old steps and lanes model would potentially be unsustainable for us. I want to be clear that when we're talking about the work that the compensation committee has done, the things that they've presented to us, the values that the compensation committee has weighted the highest seem to be some of the values that I think unanimously on this board we are all interested in, but I think that we struggle to get on the same page because we're using semantics that are maybe not talking about these, maybe are talking too specifically towards plans that people might be familiar with, and not enough towards the abstract of the values that we're trying to communicate to our staff.
Okay, yep.
I don't mean that as a criticism. I wanted to mention that the compensation committee, as I've seen it, has expressed that longevity within a school system is something that they seem to feel is valuable. So,
anybody else? I just have one comment, and then we can close the discussion unless somebody has anything else they want to say. I think that the point that has been raised several times over the last couple of years about the evaluations of educators and how that plays into this compensation plan, about administrators in charge of that evaluation not knowing enough about what the teachers do, that's very well taken. I think part of the way any compensation plan that's going to work that involves any kind of evaluation of an employee is going to mean that those doing the evaluations have to do their part. They've got to know their staff, they've got to know what they're responsible for. You know, and that's, I guess that's Tim's role in making sure that that happens. But I think that that's a very valid point, that that shouldn't happen, that, you know, my principal or whoever's doing the evaluation doesn't know what I do. And that was a problem, you know, and up until we had this new plan, people didn't need to be evaluated in any way, shape, or form. Now it's a requirement, so hopefully going forward, whatever plan we end up having, whether it's a new one or a modified version of this one, that won't happen again. Anybody else?
I just want to be clear, when
Sure.
I was talking about evaluation, I was referring to the principals needed to be involved, but that perhaps they weren't always involved in the evaluation.
Right.
And, okay.
Right.
When I mentioned administration, I was thinking of the district administration staff, not the administrators at the school. So.
Anybody else?
Yeah, just add
Sure,
one
Joe.
thing. There's a lot of teachers here tonight, and I'm sure you guys have developed thoughts while you're sitting there listening to all of this. It would be great if we could hear those before the next meeting. Our emails are widely available. That's it.
Okay.
Scott, can you just reiterate, just so that everybody's clear, what you want from the committee after its next meeting, just so that everybody's
sure,
crystal clear and there's no
Right.
ambiguity and they don't bring, you were expecting something that they
Right.
don't bring.
What we would like is, I guess, first of all, an update on where you're at. How far have you come? How much commonality is there? And where are the points of disagreement? And I guess what we really need to know is, do you really think that more time is going to lead to an end product? Or is it your opinion, which is what we've been told, that more time really doesn't seem likely to produce a result? Does that sound right to everybody here at the board? Okay.
It does. Who makes that determination? Does the committee make it?
The committee,
as a
yeah,
whole?
yes.
Like sort of vote thing, or?
Well, I don't know how they're going to do it. They've got their own structure for how they make their decisions. I'm not going to ask them to do it any differently than they have done. I don't think we should.
I'm not trying to micromanage it. I'm just.
Right, no, I know. Okay. Yes,
We
Steve?
also asked for the minute meetings, the meeting minutes
Yeah.
to get uploaded or somehow communicated.
Right. Yeah, maybe rather than rely on the Woods for that, just if you could just email it to us, that might be faster.
Right now, we don't have access to that. That is all, they take
Oh.
this and they put it out there. We get it
Okay.
from them.
Okay.
Well, we did
Them
pay for
being-
it. Hopefully we can get it.
Wood controls that website?
Yeah.
It's on the district website and Wood controls
It's a
it?
link
Just a
to their
portal to
website.
theirs.
Fix that, Paul.
No, I mean, it's proprietary. That's part of what we're paying for. $70,000.
Oy.
Okay, anything else on the compensation plan from the board? Okay. And we'll move on to the one discussion action item we have, which is athletic tournaments as fundraisers. And the, oops, why isn't this doing? There we go, got it. So there is an executive summary along with a recommendation that the board approve the current athletic tournaments and any additional tournament opportunities that arise throughout the course of the year to be treated as a fundraising activity in Fund 21. I would entertain a formal motion to adopt that proposal.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, any discussion on that? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? And that is then approved. So, future meetings and agenda items. First up, as I said earlier, we've got a meeting every Monday for the next 3 Mondays. Next Monday is a board development meeting. It begins at 6 o'clock. We'll be meeting in here, right, Tim? The first part of that is going to be instruction/training on board docs, which will be replacing Neptune. And then the rest of the meeting will be taken up with board goal setting and agenda development. I anticipate that by Thursday, I should be able to, or have Tim email out to everybody proposed agenda items over the next 12 months.
Through the reorg.
Or through the reorganization meeting, right, thank you. You know, obviously there are some things that because of, you know, when third Friday counts come and so forth, there are certain things that have to happen at certain points on the calendar. There are also some things that are in train that we'll be getting presentations on. But having looked at what we've got so far, Tim and I are working on this. I think there are slots, certainly lots of slots available to discuss other things. So if you have agenda items or ideas that you want to have the board talk about over the course of the next 10 months, well, no, 8 months, write them down, email them to me, whatever you want to do. You may find some of that's already going to be on the calendar for the next 8 months. If not, that's something that we'll be talking about. Okay? So that starts at 6. Then we've got regular meetings on August 28 and September 5. Finance meets August 28 and September 18. Facilities meets on September 19. Policy meets next on September 5. And the first home football game is September 1. It's really, really great if we can all be there. I know sometimes people have travel plans. That's Labor Day weekend. But as many of us as can be there is good. It's a great opportunity to show our faces to the community. So questions, contact Becky because she's the one that's coordinating that, correct? Okay.
Well, we did get an email though from
We got that from
police.
the...
So I just replied to that as well. I don't know who.
Mr. Dow said that he was going to coordinate that with
Okay.
her.
Yeah.
They hadn't connected yet.
Great.
That's kind of what I figured.
Okay.
Okay. So questions about any of that, folks? All right.
So it's not really the next 3 Mondays.
Yeah, the
2 Mondays
21st,
and a
28th.
Mondays
Oh,
and a
Tuesday, yeah,
Tuesday.
sorry, thank you. The 5th is Tuesday. Thank you
don't
for
show up
pointing
on
that
Labor
out.
Day.
Yeah, if you're here on Monday, the doors are going to be locked. There won't be anybody here to talk to you. Okay, with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Joe, is there a second?
I second.
Tim said it first. Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you very much. We had, I think, the sort of discussion I was hoping we would have about compensation.
It was robust.
Well, that's the point. No, that's the point. I mean, people need to hear what everyone's opinions are, so thank you.
It does seem there was some misunderstanding.